Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Today we have a question that I think that our friend Sanjay talked to you about this. I think because we were discussing it also.
Okay.
But anyway, I wanted to ask you to have this conversation with you to for the sake of a better understanding. And I'll read the question that says, actions are done through mind, speech, and body. If those actions are done based on our free will, we will also create agamya. Is agamya created just by thinking our desires, by speaking, or by trying to do something to achieve the desire? To enjoy thinking about anything creates agamya?
Okay. Firstly, create is not quite the right word here. We do agamya. We're not creating agamya. When we do agamya, we create seed. We create fruits and seeds. So agamya is the actions we do according to our will. That is under the sway of our vasanas. We do agamya by mind, speech, and body. So all actions begin with the mind. The action starts in the mind, and then we may put it into speech or we may put it into physical action. But the starting point of all action is in the mind. Whatever actions we do under the sway of our vasanas, or in other words, according to our will, are agamya, whether those actions are done by mind, speech, or body, or all three of them, or any two of them. So, for example, if I was actually talking with Sanjay about this earlier today, if, for example, the starting point of thoughts are what are called vasanas. Vasanas are the inclinations. So inclinations, in this context, I'm talking about inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. What Bhagavan refers to as Vishaya vasanas, inclinations to attend to Vishayas. That means anything other than ourselves, any object or phenomena. Because the nature of ego is, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, ego grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping on form and feeding on form, it flourishes. So grasping form, in other words, grasping things other than itself, is the very nature of ego. So the Vishaya vasanas are the inclinations to grasp things. So whenever we rise as ego, we constantly have inclinations to grasp things other than ourselves. So, as Bhagavan said, the Vishaya vasanas are rising in countless numbers, like the waves in the ocean. They're always just vasanas are rising one after another. But we always have a choice whether to allow ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas or to avoid being swayed by them. If we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, we are thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by any other vasana, by any inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. But as soon as our hold on self-attentiveness slackens, we yield to the Vishaya vasanas and we are swayed by the Vishaya vasanas. So as soon as we allow ourselves to be swayed by a Vishaya vasana, that Vishaya vasana develops from being a mere inclination into a liking, into a desire, into a thought. So as soon as we allow ourselves to be swayed, even to the slightest extent by a Vishaya vasana, the actions have started, the agamya has started. At each level, actions can have different intensity. You can just have a fleeting thought of something without attaching yourself to that thing. That such a thought will have very inconsequential fruit. But if you attach a lot of importance to it, if you think about something, supposing, for example, you're very angry with someone, the mere thought of that person will trigger off that anger. And because of the emotional intensity behind that anger, that will be a very strong thought. So such thoughts will have more, will be producing more fruit than a mere fleeting thought. But all actions, down to the most minor action, any action done under the sway of our vasanas, even the slightest action, will have fruit, but the fruit will be proportional to the action. So if it's just a very slight fleeting thought that you quickly put out of your mind, the fruit from that action will be negligible. But if there's a lot of emotional intensity behind it, it will have produced more fruit. And if you put it into speech or into action, if you start talking abusively to the person you're angry with, that will have its own fruit. That is the thoughts of anger in your mind will have fruit. The speech will have fruit. And if you actually begin physically fighting with that person, that will also have fruit. Or if you do something to, if you may not physically fight, but you may put your anger into action in some other way. You may go and report that person to the police or to a boss or something. So as soon as we are swayed by our vasanas, it starts off actions in the mind, which can lead to actions in speech and or actions of body. Each action we do, whether by mind, speech or body, will bear fruit, appropriate fruit, according to the intensity of the desire with which we do it, according to the nature of the action. If it's a good action, if you do something to help a person, or just out of the kindness of your heart, you do something, that's a good action. That will bear a good fruit. If you do a bad action out of malice or out of enmity or out of jealousy or something, that will bear bad fruit. So, but we don't have to be so concerned about the fruit, because which action is to bear which fruit is entirely in the hands of God. That's what Bhagavan says in the first verse of Upadēśa Undiyār. Karmam payantaro kartana danaya. Karma gives fruit according to the ordainment of God. So he decides which fruit is appropriate for which action, and when, where, and whether we are to experience that fruit. We don't experience the fruit immediately, because what we are to experience in this lifetime is preordained. So it's all the fruit of actions that we've done in previous lives, but not just a random selection of fruit, carefully selected by God for our own spiritual well-being. So any action of mind, speech, or body, anything we do under the sway of our vasanas, whether by mind, speech, or body, is agamya. So we do agamya, that agamya produces fruit. The fruit is not our concern, because once you've shot the arrow, you no longer have any control over it. Whether it's going to hit its target, what target it's going to hit, is out of your hands. Once you've shot it, you can do nothing further about it. Actions are like that. Once you've done an action, the fruit is no longer in your hands. It's in God's hand to decide what fruit is appropriate for which action, and when, where, and how it will be beneficial for you to experience that fruit. Many actions we do, we will never experience the fruit of those actions, because they get added to sanchita, and the sanchita is a huge pile. From that huge pile, only a tiny fraction of that is selected for us to experience in each life. So sooner or later, we'll gain vairagya and love to turn within, and bhakti, in other words, bhakti and vairagya will follow the spiritual path, and ego will be annihilated. When ego is annihilated, all three karmas come to an end. That is, there's no longer an ego there to do any agamya, and there's no longer an ego there to experience any fruit. So prarabdha comes to an end, and the sanchita, that big high pile is no longer, I mean, it vanishes because that pile is waiting to be experienced by the ego who did the actions. When that ego ceases to exist, all three karmas cease to exist, as Bhagavan says. So it's not necessary that every action we do, we will have to experience the fruit at some time. Whatever actions we do, it gets added to sanchita. If and when Bhagavan thinks it's suitable for us to experience that, if it will be beneficial for us, for our spiritual development, to experience the fruit of that karma, he will decide when, where, and how we should experience it. So that is one thing. The other thing is, when we are doing agamya, that is, when we are acting under the sway of our vasanas, we are thereby strengthening those vasanas and may also be developing new vasanas. For example, if you're interested in one thing, your interest in one subject may lead to an interest in associated subjects. For example, we're interested in Bhagavan's teachings. Because we want to know more about Bhagavan's teachings, we may be interested in understanding more about Tamil, which is the language in which he gave most of his teachings. So that is not actually, that is at the level of interest. The interests of the sprouted vasanas, but just like one interest can lead to another interest, one vasana can lead to another vasana. So whenever we are acting under the sway of our vasanas, we are strengthening those vasanas and may also be producing associated vasanas. So the vasanas are in a constant flux. Certain interests that we had in the past, we no longer have because we didn't pursue those interests. So the interest, because of lack of attention, it wanes. Likewise with vasanas. Some vasanas, vasanas are constantly rising. When we allow ourselves to be swayed by vasanas, we also have to choose whether to be swayed by this vasana or that vasana. So this process of the rising of vasanas and our deciding which vasana we allow ourselves to be swayed by, this is going on all the time. So if we allow ourselves to be swayed by certain vasanas, those vasanas will get stronger, and the vasanas that we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by, it will grow weaker.
But it's important. I guess it is important at which moment we catch the vasana, as you said. That is why
yes.
We need to. The sooner, the better. Yes.
This is another thing. That is our aim in the spiritual path is to weaken the vasanas. We weaken the vasanas by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by them, we are thereby strengthening that vasana. So, just to take an example, supposing you have an inclination to like chocolate. So when that inclination to enjoy chocolate rises in you, if you allow yourself to be swayed by it, it develops from being a mere inclination into a liking, and then from a liking into a desire. And then you may or may not act on that desire. If you act on that desire, if you begin to think about it, oh, how can I get chocolate? Will the shops be open now? Which shop has the nicest chocolate? You begin thinking about it. And then you decide, I'm going to go to such and such a shop because they've got very nice chocolates there. So you go to that shop. And you may find the shop is closed. So you then have to think about some other shop and you go to some other shop. So a series, beginning from that inclination, a series of actions have taken place. Sooner or later, you find a shop, you pay the money, you eat the chocolate. So there's a long process between the time when the inclination rises and when you act on it. Not always. Sometimes the inclination leads immediately to action. But in its example, because you don't have the chocolate immediately available, you have to go and get it and everything. So in such an example, supposing the inclination rises, it becomes a liking, it becomes a desire, a strong desire, oh, I must have chocolate now, and you decide to go to a shop and buy it. at any point in that process, you may decide not to follow on, not to pursue that, not to allow that vasana to sway you further. Supposing you go to a shop, you buy the chocolate, and then you come home, you eat one piece, and then you feel tempted to eat a second piece. You eat the second piece. Then you want to have a third piece. Then you think, no, eating too much is not good for me. So at that point, you desist. The fact you desisted at that point will have a very slight effect on weakening that vasana, because at least you've tried to curb it, but you've curbed it right at the end of the process. If you curb it earlier, if before taking the first piece you think, oh no, it's never good for me to take chocolate, it's not good for my health, you may curb it at that point. Or you may curb it even earlier. You may go to a shop and then think, why do I want to spend my money on buying chocolate? There's so many better things to spend. So there, you're checking it at an earlier place. So that curbs the vasana more. But in most worldly cases, we are not actually purifying the mind. What we are doing, we are, instead of following one vasana, we're following another vasana. So the vasana, I don't want to spend my money. On the vasana, I don't want to spoil my health, takes over, and so we decide to follow that vasana rather than this vasana. So the net effect is one vasana grows a little weaker, another vasana grows stronger. But if earlier in the process, if we curb it, supposing we curb it right at the start, as soon as the inclination to eat chocolate rises, we may decide, why should I be thinking about such things? Let me attend to myself. If you curb it at that point, that will have far more, that will weaken that vasana to a far greater extent than if you allow yourself to be swayed by it. You allow it to grow into a liking, into a desire, into thoughts about chocolate, and then into actions to get chocolate. The earlier in the process of, that is, the less we allow ourselves to be swayed by a vasana, the more we are weakening it. The more we allow ourselves to be swayed by a vasana, the more we are strengthening it.
Yeah, exactly. That it's got a lesser effect. The later you catch the vasana in the process. Yes. Exactly. And
another example, when I was talking with this subject with Sanjay today, another example. We may control our desires, not act on them, but we can still be dwelling on them in our mind. In Chadwick's book, he records something. He doesn't say about the context, and he doesn't say about the source, but he just says that apparently once Bhagavan said to someone who was thinking a lot about sex, it's better to do it than to be thinking about it. We don't know the context. And that may have been a married person who thought, I must observe brahmacharya, I must not indulge in this. But the thoughts were going on in his mind. So sometimes we can be doing more harm. We can be strengthening the vasana more by thinking about it than by doing it. Because sometimes if we act on if vasana has sprouted to the extent of a strong desire, if we act on that, then once we experience that, it's nothing after all. That is, Bhagavan says in Vācaka Kōvai, the nature of desire, it will make an atom seem like Mount Meru, a huge mountain, before attainment, and after attainment, it will make even Mount Meru seem like an atom. So when we are dwelling on objects of desire in our mind, those objects begin to loom very large. Supposing you're poor and you want money, you may think, if I could get €1,000, wouldn't that be nice? And you work hard and you get €1,000. You've got €1,000 in your account. For the first time in your life, you see your bank balance is a 4-figure number. You're very happy. Oh, I've got €1,000 now. But very quickly you think, wouldn't it be nice to have €10,000? So you work hard, you try and save up money, you've got 10,000. The more you get money, what seemed to be a very big goal at first, having 1,000 in your bank account, once you've got 1,000, it becomes a trivial thing. You want to have 10,000, you want to have 100,000, you want to have 1,000,000, you want to have 10 million. So the desire will always be, if we allow our mind to dwell on the desire, it will always be growing and growing and growing. So if you allow your mind to dwell on any object of your desire, you'll be strengthening that desire and the underlying vasana. So even if you don't act on a certain desire, if you allow your mind to dwell on it, you're still strengthening the vasana. So in order to weaken our vasanas, the sooner in the process if we nip it in the bud, that will be doing far more to weaken that vasana than if we allow ourselves to dwell on it or to put it into action.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I was talking about that with Sanjay too, because at least if you act on it, I mean, rather better than keeping it on your mind the whole time, at least you extinguish the desire temporarily, maybe for a couple of days or a week or something, but yeah, you're no longer abiding in those thoughts over and over again. So it has no effect on carving the vasana, of course. It's just indulge in it, right? But better than have it on your mind, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
As with all these things, we can discuss these things just to get a general idea, but all we need, as far as understanding is concerned, all we need to understand is the general principle. But the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by any vasana, whether in terms of the mind dwelling on that or in terms of putting it into action, the more we are swayed by any vasana, the more that we are strengthening that vasana. The more we refrain from allowing ourselves to be swayed by a vasana, the more we are weakening it. That's the general principle we need to understand. We don't have to analyze these things in too much detail. Why? Look, it's useful to understand these things, but beyond that, we are not to be dwelling on these things, because all these are things other than ourselves. We are not to think about them. We understand how the vasanas work, and that's all we need to be concerned about.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because I was asking Sanjay also about the difference between tendencies, liking, and so on. And in the end, after you replied to him, we ended up closing the subject by saying that it's just the same process, just with different names. It's not like different categories of different functions. It's just the same process with a different subtlety or grossness at the end of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is, vasanas are often described as seeds. So they are the desires, the likings and the desires in their seed form. So the seed sprout, the first little sprouting, it first manifests as a liking. Oh, wouldn't it be nice to have chocolate? Then if you allow yourself to be swayed by that liking will grow into a desire. But there's no hard and fast borderline. But at this point, the inclination becomes a liking. At this point, the inclination becomes a desire. These terms are just general terms by which we can distinguish different stages of growth. But our aim is to as Bhagavan says, if we cling fast to self-attentiveness, we are thereby destroying the vasanas in the very place from which they rise. That is, if we don't allow ourselves to be swayed at all by a vasana, we are thereby destroying it in the very place from which it arises. To the extent we allow ourselves to be swayed by it, we are doing agamya, and we will experience consequences in fruit, and also we'll be strengthening those vasanas, the seeds.
Sometimes it seems like the chocolate example is we don't need to suppose it because it's my tendency to like sugar and it's chocolate from time to time. So sometimes it's very easy. It's like when some small liking pops up in my mind. It's easy, very easy to turn away my attention and phase out. It dissolves in the mind. But sometimes as soon as it appears in the mind, it's like I know it's going to be hard to this time. Maybe I got it too late, or I don't know why, but at some point it's like I'm defeated now. I don't, for some reason I know it's impossible now.
When the mind is preoccupied with other thoughts, it's easy to brush aside things like a liking for chocolate. If you're busy on some important work or something, but it's very important for you, even though the thought of chocolate may pop up in your mind, you quickly brush it aside because what you're doing is more important. But it's when the mind is calm, but we can see the vasanas as soon as they sprout, and it's there that we need to avoid being swayed by them. By clinging to self-attentiveness, that is, the vasanas are rising in the mind constantly throughout the waking and dream states. But we generally, because our attention is so outward going, we are barely aware of those vasanas. We're only aware of them when they're in the form of a strong desire. But the more we try to turn our attention within, the more we will become aware of the vasanas in their subtle form. We'll be aware of them as soon as that inclination rises, even before it's developed into a liking. The inclination to begin thinking about chocolate or something, we'll catch it and turn our attention back to ourselves. Catch it means we notice it, and then to whom does this liking come? We turn our attention back to ourselves.
And if you said that if that's our destiny, for example, to eat that chocolate that day, for some reason, even though I turn away my attention, it would be like strange to have that chocolate without the liking for the chocolate. I mean, maybe someone hands it to me or something, but right, that could happen. I mean, that I want to avoid the day the liking, but then somebody offers some chocolate or something, and I don't want to say no or something, or I have the liking also. The liking comes up again. Right?
We cannot experience anything unless we're destined to experience it. So however much you like to have chocolate, if it's not your destiny to have chocolate today, you will not have it, however much you try to get chocolate. If something is destined for you to experience, you cannot avoid it. So if we are clinging fast to self-attentiveness, whatever we are destined to experience will be experienced, but we'll be indifferent to it. We'll be we'll be unconcerned about it. Like if, for example, to use a grosser example, supposing many people will eat while watching the television. So supposing someone prepares a very tasty meal for you, and at the same time you're watching a very interesting program on television, though it's your destiny to experience that tasty meal, you barely experience it because you have so much interest in the television program. Or alternatively, it's your destiny to experience both the television program and the meal. But if you're more interested in the television program, you'll hardly notice the tastiness of the food. Or if you're more interested in the tasty food, you'll hardly notice what's going on in the television. So what we are destined to experience, we will experience. But the extent to which we actually experience that depends upon the extent to which we allow our attention to go towards that. That is governed by the vasanas. So if we cling to self-attentiveness, whatever prarabdha throws at us, whatever we are to experience, will not affect us. It will affect us only if we allow our attention to go away from ourselves towards that other thing. That's why Bhagavan often said, prarabdha affects only the outward term mind. It can never prevent us turning our mind within. So if we want to avoid experiencing our prarabdha, the only way to avoid experiencing it is to cling to self-attentiveness. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we will thereby barely, the experience will be there, but we'll barely, because of our lack of interest in it, it will barely touch us. So
I always wonder what
so this
go ahead,
whole working of karma, how our will and what we are to experience is our prarabdha, which is the fruit of actions that we've done by our will in the past. So our will, the vasanas, they are the cause. The prarabdha is the effect. That's why it's called the fruit. It's called fruit of karma, karma pala. So how this, in this lifetime, whatever actions we do under the sway of our vasanas will not change what we are to experience. But there's a constant interaction, because the two are going on hand in hand. We cannot separate that, particularly as far as our actions are concerned. People often ask, if I do this, is that agamya or is it prarabdha? We cannot say. Prarabdha is only our experience. No actions are actually, it is not prarabdha that is making us do actions. In order for us to experience prarabdha, there are certain actions we need to do. Those actions we are made to do by God in accordance with our prarabdha. That's what Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the note he wrote for his mother. It's very carefully worded. Avarava prarabdha prakaram. That means in accordance with the prarabdha, Adakanavan, he who is for that, which means God or Guru, Angangirintu, being there, which implies being in every place or being in the heart of every jiva, every living being, Artavipam, will make them act. So it is not the prarabdha that is making us act, it is God that is making us act in accordance with our prarabdha. Because if we don't act in accordance with our prarabdha, we won't be able to experience that prarabdha. So some of our actions are being driven both by God in accordance with our prarabdha and by our own will. We cannot separate these because often many actions are driven by both. So we cannot distinguish one from the other. And we need not, because it need not concern us. We are not, if we want to, the actions that we are destined to, that we need to do in accordance with our prarabdha, we will be made to do. The actions we do by our will, we will do so long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas. If you want to avoid doing agamya, in other words, if you want to avoid acting according to our will, we have to curb, we have to avoid being swayed by the vasanas, even to the slightest extent. Vishaya vasana. If we are swayed by a Vishaya vasana, even to the slightest extent, to that extent we are doing agamya.
There is an analogy. I don't know if it's an accurate analogy or well, no analogy is accurate in the end, but there is the analogy of the person that walks their dog with on a leash, and that the person, the owner, would represent the destiny because they're the one that they're guiding the dog, and where the owner has the ultimate word to say where the dog has to go, and the dog has only a limited frame of action, because
that is quite an appropriate. That is quite an appropriate analogy.
So, for example, if the dog bites someone on the street, a child or someone else, that would mean, of course, that was the action of the dog, but also because the owner was negligent and allowed that to happen also. So it's hard to tell. They're intertwined. The will and prarabdha are intertwined. It's hard to say to which extent.
Analogies like this can help us to some extent to understand, but we can never we cannot in practice distinguish one from another. That is, an analogy like this helps us to understand how there is freedom within prarabdha. That is, though we have to experience whatever we are destined to experience, so long as we can experience it only if we allow our attention to go outwards. If we keep our attention inwards, we will not be affected by it. But though we cannot avoid what we are destined to experience, and we cannot experience anything that we are not destined to experience, yet within those constraints, we have complete freedom of will, because it may be our destiny to be poor all our life. That doesn't stop us wanting to be rich. It also doesn't stop us making effort to be rich. But our scope for making effort to be rich will be very limited if our destiny is to be poor. That is, a person who is struggling every day to earn enough just to get enough food or to provide for his family, such a person may have lots of ideas of how to make money, but because all his or her time is spent working just for the basic necessities, they'll never be able to follow those schemes to make money, because they just don't have time for it. So the scope of our freedom of action is limited by the prarabdha. Just like the dog can run this way or that way within certain limits, because he's on the leash. Sometimes the owner may allow the leash to be longer, giving the dog a little bit more freedom. Sometimes it may hold the dog closer to. So there are constraints on our freedom of action, but there are no constraints on our freedom of will. That dog may not be able to run and fight with those other dogs who are on the other side of the street, but that doesn't stop it wanting to and trying to pull in that direction to do so.
Exactly. I've always wondered the case, and I know this is an Atma-vichara, but what is the case with serial killers, for example? Because it's like, okay, prarabdha allowed them to make these evil acts, these murders and so on. Yes. But at the same time, it's a very gross vasana that
the thing
that makes them act like that.
The prarabdha is allotted by God. It is selected and allotted by God. The prarabdha is tailor-made to suit us. So if we have no inclination to kill people, or even if we sometimes we may get so exasperated with someone we wish we could kill them, but we would never act on that, because it's just not our nature to act in that way. We will not be given the prarabdha of a serial killer. It's only someone who had very, very strong inclinations to be cruel or to do whatever. Only such a person would have such a prarabdha. So the prarabdha is tailor-made to suit us, because the aim of God in selecting our prarabdha is what are those fruits that, if we experience, will be most conducive to our spiritual development. So how can being a serial killer be conducive to our spiritual development? Because if we are given a prarabdha in which we can act on those vasanas, we may be caught and put in jail, and then we may begin to regret these things. So we can't say, but whatever is allotted to us, it is allotted for a purpose. And that purpose, God can understand these things, we cannot, and we need not. It's not our job. the fruit of karma, once you've discharged the arrow, the arrow is no longer your business, because there's nothing you can do about it. You've discharged it. It may go and hit a tree. It may hit a person. It may just fall in the middle of the road or in the middle of the field or whatever. What happens to that, the discharged arrow, is no longer in our hands, so we need not be concerned about it. So the fruit of karma, we need not be concerned about. What we need to be concerned about is, we need not even be concerned about the agamya. All we need to be concerned about is not allowing ourselves to be swayed by the vasanas. If we avoid being swayed by the vasanas, automatically we will avoid doing agamya. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by the vasanas, automatically we're doing agamya. So it's at the level of vasanas that we need to control it.
But when our attention goes outwards and we act on our Vishaya vasanas and so on, at least we can aim the arrow and hit the person or hit the wall, something.
Yes.
Like the right action, at least.
Yes.
So like ahimsa and not causing harm to others.
When we are turning our attention within and holding on to I am, all sorts of vasanas will be rising. Good vasanas, bad vasanas. All vasanas are bad, in that they're taking our attention away from ourselves. Even though some of them may be relatively good, relatively bad, but relatively good and relatively bad vasanas matter only when we allow our attention to be swayed by them. So if we allow our attention away from ourselves, then it's important that we allow ourselves to be swayed by the good vasanas rather than the bad vasanas. If at all we're to be swayed by vasanas, it's better to be swayed by subha vasanas, good vasanas, than asubha vasanas, bad vasanas.
So why would you say that desire is bad in the spiritual path? Because it keeps our attention away from ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, the excitement, the passion, the interest, all those things.
Yes.
It makes our mind to abide in those things, and that keeps our attention going up.
Yeah. But right? One thing, if you see Bhagavan's teachings, Bhagavan doesn't talk so much about desires. He talks more about vasanas. Why? Because the desires are nothing but the sprouted vasanas. If we can curb the vasanas, if we avoid being swayed by the vasanas, it won't grow into a desire. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by the vasana, it then grows into a desire, and yes, desires are a problem, but what precedes the desire is the vasana. So it's at the level of vasanas Bhagavan wants us to deal with these things.
Yeah. So
of course, in order to curb the vasana, we also need to curb that is the vasana sprout as likings and develop into desires. Once the desire is there in our mind, it's better to curb it. Okay, we've been swayed by the vasana to this extent. Let's not be swayed by it further to act on it. So we try to curb our desires. We try not to act on our desires. We try to turn our attention back within.
I don't know if it's Buddhists that say that desire is the root of all problems or something like that. But that would be that would be the vasana, actually.
It is true.
That would be the sprouted.
In a certain sense, desires are the root of all problems. But whatever root of the desires, it's the vasanas. And what is the root of the vasanas? Ego. So the ultimate root is only ego. But it is the very nature of ego to have vasanas. And if ego is swayed by those vasanas will grow into desires.
And that's why we cannot have vasanas go with ego. I mean, that's why we cannot have an ego without vasanas until the very end, because that would be unnatural for ego.
Yeah. Because
it wouldn't be going upwards.
Ego's very nature is to grasp form. So the vasanas are the inclinations that grasp form. So vasanas are not ego, but it's the nature of ego to have vasanas.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why until the very, very end, some vasanas are going to be there, at least in to a minimum extent.
Inevitably.
Some interest on some,
Until the ego is destroyed,
or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is called vasanakshaya, destruction of ego, is a synonym for eradication of ego, because it's only when ego is eradicated that the vasanas will all be eradicated. But in order to eradicate ego, the vasanas first need to be weakened to a considerable extent, because so long as the vasanas are strong, we won't be willing to turn within and surrender ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And we do that by turning within again.
Turning within, yes.
That's right. Even though if at first it's hard for us to catch the vasanas in the very beginning, even though if we catch the vasanas when they are growing into likings or desire and so on, at least at that point it is helpful at the point to start catching the vasana there and turning back within.
Yeah, again, the terminology, we're not exactly catching. That is, as soon as we notice that we have been swayed by any Vishaya Vasana, we try to turn our attention back to ourselves in order to avoid being swayed further by it. I think that's what you mean by catching the Vasana.
Yeah, why wouldn't you use catch, the verb catching, Michael?
Because the Vasana is an inclination. When the inclination rises, we have a choice. Do we allow ourselves to be swayed by that inclination or not? If we allow ourselves to be swayed by it, the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by it, the further away from ourselves it's going to take us. The more it's going to take our attention outwards. So at a certain point, if you use catch in the sense of notice, yes, once we notice, I've been swayed by this vasana, but merely noticing that we've been swayed by our vasana doesn't stop us being swayed by it. We need to turn our attention back to ourselves. So what we need to catch is ourselves in order to avoid being swayed by that vasana.
Yeah, it's true. I know there are some terminology which is more precise and it gives the proper connotation to an explanation. So in a certain way, you at the beginning you said that instead of creating agamya, we are doing agamya, and the creation is for the phala, right?
Yes.
Good. That's what is created.
Yes.
And we just do it. Exactly. Okay.
That it's the trying to be precise in the terminology isn't just hair splitting. It's trying to understand the process clearly. So if we use the appropriate words, it'll help us to understand the process more clearly.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that's why you say many times you avoid saying the self, for example, and you say ourself or ego instead of the ego, right?
Exactly.
It's closer. It is a bit closer to the meaning you want to convey.
I mean, words are limited. Words can never convey this subject, but this is a very deep and subtle subject. And this subject is not about objects, it's about the subject itself. So words can never be adequate for this subject. But if we are careful in our use of words, are pointers. So in order to point accurately, we try to use the most appropriate words. We try to avoid words that may be taken as pointing in a different direction. Like if we say the self and put a capital S for it, it's as if it's something other than ourselves, but there is no self other than ourselves. So we try to be more precise in the words we use in order to, the whole point is turning our attention back to ourselves. So we try to use those words that will tend to take our attention less away from ourselves.
Is that the same way you say ego instead of the ego? Because the ego might be, we might take that something different from ourselves at this point.
Yes. We all do this. We say my ego.
I know.
Who is the me who has an ego? It's only ego. So, oh, my ego is causing me so much trouble.
Yeah, like I'm a victim. My ego caught me, and I'm a victim.
If you translate that into plain language, my ego is causing me so much trouble. I am causing myself so much trouble.
It's true. As long as we need words, it's better to define at least.
Yes. Words are designed for talking about objective things. So words can never be adequate in this line. But when we are trying to point at something, we try to point in the most precise way, in the most helpful way, in a way that will not lead to misunderstandings.
Okay, so Mike, I think we could end up we could end the conversation by summing up a little bit and tell me if that would be okay, an okay practice for for people. So, for example, if we have some thoughts or sad desire or liking appearing in our mind, what we should do when we notice those thoughts, that desire, whatever, is to turn our attention within.
Yes.
If for example, if some hours, a day or two goes by and we still thinking, abiding in that, 1, 2, 3, maybe it's better to act on that and extinguish that desire temporarily. At that point, if we are not able to, I mean, depending on the desire, of course.
Yes, it depends on the desires. That is, we have to be. Our aim is to curb all our desires, but in order to curb, we have to do so intelligently. Sometimes trying to forcibly, if you've got a very strong desire and you're forcibly trying to suppress it, it will be niggling you. Sometimes it's better, provided that desire is not going to do any harm to anyone. Fulfilling that desire is not going to do any harm to some. Sometimes it's better to fulfill the desire, because whenever you fulfill a desire, if you do so with discrimination, you will see that what appeared to be something very big beforehand is actually very trivial. So sometimes acting on a desire can help us to curb the tendency to dwell upon it in our mind.
Thank you very much again, because I think your help is so valuable that it's a pleasure to have you here every time, Michael.
This is it's not really my help. It's Bhagavan. It's just just pointing out what Bhagavan has taught us.
Yeah, exactly.
And how to apply it in practice.
Yeah, the most important thing, how to apply it. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, Michael.
Bhagavan's teachings are all about practice.